So I'm Jennifer Buechler. I'm going to be presenting on communicating upward, creating alignment with your manager. That is not the talk you thought you were attending. This is your chance to change breakout rooms. But hopefully it is the one you're attending, and I'll get started. So pretty simple agenda for today. I have this broken up into an introduction, some basic, intermediate, and advanced strategies that you can use. I'm going to pause for questions after each one of those and an opportunity to have some discussion in the chat. And then I'll wrap it up at the end and open it up to any questions on the overall presentation. So I want to introduce myself to start out with. I've been at SpectraLogic for about 5 years now. I'm the sustaining engineering manager. I've been managing for 4 years, and so, I've experienced what that end of the relationship is like, having folks reporting to me. But really, there was a turning point for me 2 years ago. I was promoted to reporting to the executive level, and all of a sudden, my manager had never done my job before. She even told me that she didn't feel like she had a great understanding all the time of what my team did or what I was doing. And it became really important for me to be intentional about that upward communication. I also had the opportunity to take advantage of some leadership coaching. And this is something I would definitely recommend if you ever have the chance to do it. Worked with a coach one-on-one on some of my professional goals, and one of them was communicating upwards and outwards. So I picked up some strategies from that, but definitely also just found coaching overall to be really helpful for finding that leadership niche that Joe Miller was talking about, thinking about how I want to be as a leader, what do I want to pursue, what do I want to improve on. Just having that space to discuss it with someone was super helpful. So that's kind of what has gotten me interested in this topic and where my experience is coming from. All right, so what is managing up? I called the talk communicating upwards because there can be a really negative connotation to managing up, and some people will think about that as being somehow manipulative or underhanded, and that's not the way that I'm thinking about this or wanting to approach it. So I want to start out with this definition of the process of consciously working with your supervisor to obtain the best possible results for you, your boss, and the organization. And I thought this comic also did a good job of kind of showing both sides of that. So the boss says, "I heard you presented a webinar that presented tips for how to manage your boss. Did you learn anything useful?" Actually, boss, we learned a number of useful tips for how to be better direct reports to you, and we look forward to trying them out. Right, look forward to that too. So it kind of shows the duality here on how this can be positive, but there's a lot of, it depends on how you frame it. I am going to use boss and manager interchangeably because boss is easier to say. Pretty much no other reason besides that. All right, so why do you want to manage up? Here's some of the main reasons that I became interested in being more intentional about this. The first one for me is reducing rework. So there's nothing more frustrating to me than spending days or weeks on an assignment and then checking in with my boss and finding out I've gone down the totally wrong path, that I'm going to have to completely redo what I was working on. So keeping that alignment is going to reduce the miscommunications that you're having around the direction of the project. If you're keeping those communication lines open, it also gives your manager an opportunity to remove roadblocks for you. One of the ways that this has come up recently in my position is that we manage regulatory compliance in my team, and there's new standards that have come out that we're going to have to meet, and we're going to need some new resources to be able to do that. And sharing that with my manager, talking through it, and building a plan over time for getting those resources, she's able to plant the seed with our chief finance officer and with other managers that this is a direction that we're going to head in. And ultimately, what you want to get to with this relationship with your manager is a situation where it's mutually beneficial. So it's pretty obvious that your boss can help you, but if you're able to learn and help your boss, then that's going to make this more of a teamwork and collaborative relationship. And that'll ultimately open up new opportunities. So, as your manager gets to know you, gets to know your strengths, they're going to think of you for those stretch projects. They're going to think of you when promotions come along, and that's going to help move your career forward. All right, so now that I've convinced you that this is a topic that is worth thinking about, I'm going to jump into some strategies and techniques that you can use. And my goal here is to have some really concrete examples of how do you carry out communicating upwards and make that successful. So to start with the basics, don't cause drama, don't surprise your boss. I believe I read this in an Ask a Manager blog a while ago. I couldn't find the original blog post, but I just thought it was kind of a funny and succinct way to put it. Of the, if you do this kind of minimum amount, you'll already be ahead of a surprising number of employees. So don't cause drama. What does that look like? Avoid office gossip. Talking about people behind their backs, especially, on a personal level, is obviously not going to be helpful and can come around and be a problem. Work out disagreements calmly and professionally. We all have times that we disagree with colleagues and get frustrated, but there's never a good time to be yelling, calling each other names, or throwing things at each other. And if you think that sounds extreme, I have had people that report to me that are fully, adult humans do all those things at work. So try to avoid that. And then also ask for clarification. So if there's some direction you're getting from your boss and it just seems like a really stupid idea or a really terrible idea, try to really understand where they're coming from and where that decision is coming from before you go and vent to colleagues or just kind of talk to others about this idea. All right, don't surprise your boss. So make sure that they hear about problems or issues from you instead of from somebody else. When I first started in my systems engineer role at SpectraLogic, I was doing a lot of troubleshooting on the manufacturing line. And sometimes, I'd be looking at a product that was supposed to ship and just not feel comfortable that it was ready to ship. And, I was able to make the call on, hey, do we delay this shipment or not? And had discussed with my manager that he was comfortable with me doing that. Kind of what the scope that he was comfortable with me doing that. But if I, found an issue and thought it affected a whole batch, of products going out, that's definitely something where I need to escalate that to my manager as soon as possible and make sure that they're not caught off guard by somebody else asking them about that problem. And be mindful of going over your manager's head. So even if you're in a really casual organization that's not very hierarchical, let's say you're in the company cafeteria and you see your boss's boss and they ask you how work is going, and you tell them about, oh, this great idea that you just had for a new project. Well, now your boss's boss is going to go to your boss and ask you about that project, and your boss is going to have no idea what they're talking about. And, that's going to make them feel unprepared and caught off guard. So, ideally, you're not going to tell anything to your boss's boss that your boss isn't already aware of. And then finally, be explicit about priorities and dropping balls. And this one could almost be more in the intermediate category, I would say, but we all run into situations where we can't get everything done that's on our plate. And the best thing you can do is tell your manager about that as soon as you know that. You know, if you think you're not going to be able to make a deadline that's 3 months out, that's a whole different situation than I'm not going to be able to make the deadline that's happening tomorrow. The more warning that they have, the more that we can do something about it, or reset expectations or reschedule the deadline. You just have a lot more options earlier on. Something that I've started doing in my current role that's been really helpful is, literally listing the projects that I'm working on, and the order of priority, and then there's kind of a line of like, okay, projects below this line, they're not really getting worked on right now. So go to my manager and say, oh, I'm working on projects apple, banana, and cantaloupe, but I'm not really having time right now to work on project elephant or flamingo. And then you can have that conversation with your manager, and maybe they say, well, we really need to focus more on project elephant. Okay, that's that. I can shift things around, but now this is the project that's probably going to suffer because of that, and just really laying out those priorities and how you're approaching it. All right, first discussion break. Are there any questions on the basics, or any tips that you guys want to share on avoiding drama and keeping your boss in the loop? And Christy, if you have, or sorry, not Christy, Caitlin, if you have seen any questions come in the chat, that would be helpful.
Yeah, no questions yet, but Julie answered so far and said that the weekly report outs are helpful that she uses.
I use this too. I think it's a surprisingly powerful tool. So when I started in my current role, and my boss said, I don't feel like I know what your team is working on, I started sending her an email every week with just some of the high level projects we're working on. It doesn't cover 100% of what we're doing, that would be pages and pages, right? But it talks about what are the major things that my group is working on right now. And I send it to her, 24 hours before our one-on-one. It gives her a chance to review it and ask me any questions, and it helps her just be more familiar with what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then Caitlin also said figuring out which type of communication they prefer. In her case, her direct boss prefers text, while other colleagues prefer a Teams message or an email.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually something that I'm going to touch on in the next section here, but it's definitely important to pay attention to those communication styles.
Yeah, so we have a lot of great ones in here. I won't read through all of them, but we did have one question that came in too from Laura Lee about tips for keeping your bosses in the loop while remote.
Yeah, that's a great question. It can be a little bit more challenging for sure, especially if you have a boss that's pretty overloaded on emails. Sending more and more emails about what you're working on maybe isn't gonna do it. I do think that weekly report out is very helpful. Something that my company did remotely when we went remote was increase our frequency of one-on-ones. If that's an option, that can also be helpful. So, instead of meeting every other week, maybe you meet every week. You got to have a boss that's willing to spend the time on that. But it was a good way to stay in touch. Yeah, and if anyone has any other suggestions that they can offer up on that, it's for sure more challenging in the remote environment. All right, I'm gonna move on, but I loved that everyone's kind of contributing on this already. Thank you. All right, managing up intermediate. Get to know your manager's work style. This obviously isn't actually referring to clothes. I just thought, what icon says style to me? Pumps. I don't wear pumps anymore, but I used to like them when I went to work. And respecting your manager's time. All right, get to know your manager's work style. So this is all of the different communication methods that my company is currently using. We have Zoom chat and Zoom video. We have Outlook for emails. We've got Jabber office phones. I have my boss's cell phone number for texting and calling. And then obviously, if you're not in a remote environment, there's also in-person meetings. So everybody has their own preferences on this. Someone was mentioning that their boss prefers text. Others might think that, the personal cell phone is only something that you're going to use in emergency situations or outside of work hours. So pay attention to how your boss sends communication out and kind of your overall work culture around it. And also consider what format is going to be best for communicating the urgency and getting your message across. So anything that has a notification is going to be higher urgency. Phone call, text message, or an instant message. Those are all going to demand attention right away. And so you should consider do you really need to be interrupting that person? Is this actually something that needs to be handled right away? And additionally, for the text and instant message, those are usually better for pretty quick questions and not necessarily for having like an in-depth discussion. So things like, hey, I'm going to be 5 minutes late to this meeting. That's a great text, right? Or, something that's an easy question to answer off the top of their head. If you have something that it really requires a lot more explanation, maybe the person's going to need to think about it. Maybe there's some data you need to present. Email is going to be better for that, or scheduling a meeting where you can walk the person through it. I would also say personally that I don't think having a discussion of where you need, more than 2 or 3 people to contribute. It's pretty hard to get everyone engaged at the same time on like a Slack platform or on email. And so that's when you want to think about having a meeting if you really need everybody's input. Respect your manager's time and everyone else's. Obviously, the focus of this talk is managing up, but actually I would suggest thinking about emails this way for everybody. So sometimes you get an email and it's just this wall of text, and the busier somebody gets, the less likely they are to read that email. They're going to open it up and just say, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this right now. And maybe they'll come back to it later. Maybe they'll completely forget about it. Or maybe they'll sort of skim through it and not really get the point that you're trying to get across. So this is like a whole story I wrote on the Wizard of Oz about why I'm going to be late, because I ended up in the land of Oz. What I would suggest on this is put the relevant information, the summary at the top with like a sentence or two. So for those of us millennials, this would be the TLDR, the too long didn't read. What do they really need to know at the top? So what this boss really needs to know is that an unexpected emergency happened to me yesterday. I'm going to be out for the rest of the week, but I'm going to check email when I can. Please let me know if you have any concerns. And then I can put the whole story below. And this immediately lets that boss know, Jennifer's not going to be around. And if there's any projects that are really vital, anything that's urgent, I need to make sure that somebody has that covered. I also do this with sending out meeting notes. So right at the top, I'll put any major decisions that we made and any action items for people. And I'll even use that highlighting or bold to call out people's names on action items. Hey, Jennifer, this is your action item. And then I'll put all the meeting notes below. So so that people can see, okay, this is what I need to act on. This is the outcome of our meeting. And then if I want to, refresh my memory on other discussion that happened, it's below, it's there for reference, but you're going to get that action information right at the top. And then I've also done this with more technical discussions in email too, because sometimes you do need to get into those details and you can't, just do one summary. So you can similarly say, hey boss, I'm trying to decide how many prototypes to buy. Put that at the top and then say, this is what I'm considering. And you can lay out, the pros and cons of the different quantities of prototypes you could buy. But they're going to read that email and know, what am I looking for in this email? Oh, I'm looking for deciding on number of prototypes. So it just really helps set the tone on it. Oh, and my last comment on long emails is, if you are bringing someone into a chain that's been going back and forth and there's already, a dozen messages in it, please, please, please summarize what happened earlier in that chain. So, if I'm bringing in Heather to this email, I might say, Heather, we've been talking about the support issue at our King Soopers customer, and we want, we're looking for your perspective on, the King Soopers customer relationship, whatever it is. So if you're bringing someone into an email chain like that, summarize what the chain is about, and you can even tell them, you don't really need to read the rest of the chain. This is the part that's relevant to you, so that they can jump right in and they don't feel like they need to try to dig through it. All right. And then being responsive when you're busy. This is something I learned from somebody that reports to me that is like one of my favorite things as a boss. Because sometimes I'll send out an email and say, hey, we have this meeting next Tuesday. I want to hit the ground running on it. And so please come with ideas about what projects we need to work on. And then I'll send it out to my team and not a single person will reply. And then you sit there and you go, oh, did I send the email? Was it confusing? Are people thinking about it? Are they not? And you're kind of in this weird limbo state. So something you can do if your boss sends you a request like that and you just need more time on it, is you can just reply and acknowledge that you saw the email. Hi, boss. I need to spend more time thinking about project ideas, but wanted to acknowledge that I saw your email. I'll send my thoughts by end of day Monday. So this lets your boss know that you saw the email, you're thinking about it, and when they can expect to hear back from you on it. And it gives them an opportunity to say, oh, can you actually get me those ideas by Friday? And now you're on the same page about the fact that about when you're going to respond and when they can expect that. So this is a really simple thing that I think is very powerful. All right, discussion break. What other things about your manager's work style do you pay attention to? How do you respect people's times and be responsive and reliable? Or are there any questions for me so far? And I don't think I saw any questions come in. Did you see any, Caitlin?
No, but I didn't see any questions. Well, we have a few answers coming in the chat now. All right, so Heather said choosing whether or not to send an email carefully. That's a good point.
Definitely.
Miranda said, when in doubt, pick up the phone so you can gain tone information versus email only. We do have one question from Patricia. When you first join a company, what is the best way to set a good relationship with your boss?
That's a great question, and probably could be a whole presentation on its own. But I think my succinct answer on that would be to just really nail out all the expectations. What are your major responsibilities in your job? What are they measuring and looking for you to do? Sometimes you'll have a job description, sometimes you won't. Sometimes they'll tell you this off the bat, sometimes they won't. It depends. But if you're not clear on like what's the most important responsibilities that I need to work on, or how am I being measured and evaluated, definitely start at that level, and then you can work into more getting to know them and how to work with them most effectively. And so asking, what kinds of things do I need to give you a heads up on? What kinds of things can I decide on my own? How do you prefer to communicate? Go ahead and ask that. And I think that's a good starting point. And then this is also something that you work on over time and improve over time. So, I'm a big fan of continuous improvement. Maybe you try the weekly reports and they aren't working. Okay, what can we do differently? And so just, continually trying to improve that relationship would be my suggestion. All right. And the advanced topics. Why did I call these advanced topics? To be completely transparent, it's because these are the ones that I think I still have the most need to improve on. So asking for and receiving feedback and supporting company strategy. Asking for and receiving feedback. So a few techniques on this one. I would highly suggest being specific when you're looking for feedback. So if you go to your boss and say, how am I doing at my job? They're probably going to say, oh yeah, you're doing good. Okay, not a lot to work with there, right? It's hard to know what to improve on or even what you're doing really well. So if you can be more specific, it's going to give you a lot more useful information. You could instead say something like, oh, you were in that meeting last week where I presented those graphs. I've really been trying to work on presenting data in a way that is clear to the audience, even if they're not as familiar with the situation. How do you think that came across? Well, now they have something much more concrete to give feedback on. They know what you're trying to work on, and you're going to get something that's a lot more constructive and useful out of that. When you're asking for feedback, you also want to pay attention to if they need more time to think about it. I know that I don't always give great feedback on the spot, and we all, as humans, have a tendency to just give feedback on what's top of mind. And so if you put someone on the spot, they may only think about what happened yesterday or what happened last week and not really the big picture. So give them time to think. If you're seeing some hesitation, especially, and say, hey, I don't need this answer today. Would it be all right if I checked back in with you next week? Tell them when you want to check back in with them on it, and then make a note and follow up on it. When you're receiving that feedback, the best advice that I've received is to be curious. I think this fits in with Heather Doty's overall theme for this year. But this was something that I really learned about with my leadership coach. And so maybe you're wondering, why is my icon for receiving feedback a scientist? And it has to do with this mindset that I worked on with my coach for receiving feedback. And her way of approaching it was try to be like a scientist. So approach the feedback you're receiving as like, oh, this is an interesting problem to learn about. What's the evidence for this problem? What are the variables here? How might I do an experiment, change a variable, and get a better outcome? And really kind of step back and look at the problem and be open to it, and consider how you're going to approach it. So I like this approach because it helps remove some of the emotion and defensiveness out of the situation. When somebody gives you some constructive feedback, it's easy to make excuses or to explain to them why that's not the case. But that's missing an opportunity to grow. And so you want to be open to it. You want to understand why they're giving you that feedback. And then you want to think about if there's anything you want to change in response. So think about being a scientist. And then finally, consider the source. So as much as you want to be open to feedback, you also don't want one person's view to completely change your self-image. If it's your manager's view, it's clearly very important, right? They have a lot of ability to influence your career and the opportunities you're going to have at that company. And so you're going to have to weight their input more heavily. But they are still just one person. and they have some limited view into your work. They're not with you all day, every day. They don't see all your interactions or everything that happens. And so, maybe they're seeing a certain view and you need to help them see other things that you're working on or other things that you're doing. Maybe they have their own pet peeves or weaknesses that they're working on, and they're projecting that when they're evaluating you. So if your manager is working on their own communication, they might be really sensitive to your communication when they're evaluating your skills. And so it's not, you still want to integrate this feedback as best as you can, but also remind yourself that this is one point of view, and and it has its own limitations. And then supporting company strategy. So really try to learn what your company goals and strategies are. What are they talking about in the all company meetings? What are we seeing at, what's the product roadmap that's going to be released coming forward? And, are there any specific goals? Increase revenue by this amount, or, increase quality in this dimension, right? So what are those overall company goals? And ideally what you're going to be able to do with this is cut like this org chart that I've got on the right. You're going to be able to break that down and understand where your role fits into those company goals. So, maybe you can't affect every goal, or maybe there's only one piece of it that's in your department, but drawing that connection and saying, oh, this is how I influence that revenue goal is really important, and it's going to help you take on that visible work that Joe Miller was talking about. So, usually there's 100 things that you could work on, and how do you decide what to work on? This can help you guide that answer. And how is your manager being measured? Maybe your manager is going to come out and tell you that, maybe they're not, but you can pay attention to what are the pieces of information they really zero in on. What are they communicating up the chain on their side? And, what is really something they're always asking about, looking for updates on, that's going to give you a clue on where their priorities are lying. So another thing is to consider the business environment as a whole. One of the things that was really helpful for me in getting professional development has been learning about budgeting cycle at my company and how does it work. And you should absolutely do this even if you do not own a budget yet, because if you go to your boss and say, hey, I really want to raise, or I really want to go to the SWE annual conference and have, company support on it, your boss might be totally on board with that, but if they don't have the money in the budget, they might not be able to do anything on it yet. And so, bring up the idea, say, hey, I'm interested in this SWE conference. Is that something that you think could be supported? How do I do that? What do I need to meet? How much warning do you need? When is that budgeting going to happen? And really understanding how you get that in the plan. And then you're going to have much higher likelihood of success to get, that financial support that you're looking for. Another element of this that my husband actually suggested that was really interesting is that, as an engineer, you're often going to be really familiar with the key, technical components of a project, and you're going to, have your own recommendations on what the best technical route is to go. And then sometimes your company's going to go a different direction. And so understanding why there are some business decisions that are not going to be the optimal technical decision is really going to reduce frustration on your side. His example was that they were looking for a new software solution to use and had narrowed it down to a few and had a preferred option. And then his company went out and acquired another company that offered a similar solution. Well, for the business as a whole, using the product that was acquired is going to make more sense and save cost even if it's not the best technical solution. And so understanding that big picture is really important. And then finally, share your wins and your team wins with your manager, especially so, as you're completing those projects that support the company goal, or if you can pitch how your projects support the company goal, make sure your manager knows about them. An example of this is that, in the pandemic, my company was being really cautious on hiring and really encouraging folks to find ways to streamline their work and be more efficient. My team, I have some software engineers that were wanting to rewrite some code that had been written several years ago and that was causing a lot of extra time whenever we had to update it. It can be hard to pitch a code rework project like that when we're just rebuilding something that already exists, but it really fit in nicely with the streamlining work category, because now that we've rewritten that code, every time we make changes going forward are going to be faster and easier to implement, and that supports that company goal. And I made sure I shared that with my boss, so she knew that I was thinking about that company goal and I was looking toward the future in that way. And support with data if possible. I think this is really powerful in engineering departments. If you can say, I saved X dollars on the product, I saved, reduced X percent of quality issues, that's really easy for your manager to go and share broadly, and you can succinctly show that impact. All right, so discussion break. Any questions on getting to know, receiving feedback or supporting company strategy, or any tips that you want to share? All right, I'll let you guys keep thinking. That's everything that I had for today. Thank you so much for joining my talk. I'm happy to open it up to questions on anything I talked about today, or just kind of managing and communicating up in general. I'd be interested in connecting with folks on LinkedIn if you're interested. And as a quick review of the 6 strategies that I talked about. So don't cause drama, don't surprise your boss, get to know your manager's work style, respect your manager's time, ask for and receive feedback, and support company strategy. And did I miss any questions, Caitlin?
Yeah, we've had a few things come into the chat. So a couple comments. There was one comment from Lauralee. She said, I received some feedback that was unlike any feedback I had ever received, and not in a good way. I took a week, thought about it, and set up a follow-up meeting to chat with that person who gave me the feedback. It's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think an important thing to remember is that you can take that time to think about it. If you are really surprised by some feedback, you can be really simple in your response and just say, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. I want to spend some time thinking about it, and let's come back to it. That's totally reasonable. And if you're having that emotional response, that can be a good way to give yourself some time.
Yep, good point. We have one question. What is the easiest way to receive constructive feedback from your boss?
Yeah, and I always like starting with the thank you for this feedback. I just think it gives you a little bit of time. And then make sure you really understand why they're giving you that feedback. So if you get some feedback that says, sometimes you come off as a little condescending. I've received that feedback before. It's not fun. Really try to understand why or what situations that's happening in. If it's, if you are having trouble understanding where that feedback is coming from. Oh, thank you. How is that showing up? Can you give me an example? I really want to understand this better. And yeah, again, thinking in that scientist mode of how can we both address this together, because that changes this from a top down oh, I'm giving you this bad news, into, oh, we're on the team together and we're both approaching this problem.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I like that. One other question we have from Renee: would you suggest letting someone know ahead of time if you were going to provide them feedback on something versus springing it on them?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I'm gonna have to think about that. When I give performance evaluations to people, I definitely let them know when those are happening, because that's kind of a bigger, set of feedback that I'm giving out. And so I always try to say, like, I'm going to be giving you feedback so that people can get themselves, in that mode. But you also don't want people to, you don't want to, actually cause more anxiety. And so I think, the classic example on TV shows or whatever is like, we have to talk, right? Try not to be too vague about it. And if you are working out some kind of disagreement, or you do have some constructive feedback, try to tell them, hey, I'd like to discuss more about, how that meeting went. Let's set up a time to talk, and then they can at least come prepared for, like, what situation are we talking about, and that, maybe this is gonna have a little bit more conflict resolution or constructive feedback in it, but at least telling the person, like, what is it we're going to be talking about.
Yep, good idea. Maureen had a comment. She said that last month we had a team building workshop. Prior to the session, the team submitted feedback on me and how our team was going. I read it, took some time to digest, and then asked clarifying questions, since some were contradicting. She scheduled one-on-ones to see their preferences.
That's a great way to handle it, and really impressive. I mean, when you make that effort to reach out to people and be open to their feedback, even if you don't change anything, but you take the time to understand where they're coming from, that's really going to build that bridge.
Yeah, definitely. It's important just to know that, like, our leaders care and respect the opinions of, giving that thought. All right, and then one last question from Patricia. When is it okay to give feedback to your boss or advocate for something that you would notice needs to be adjusted?
Yeah, those are both tricky situations. I do believe that in general, telling someone they need to change if they haven't opened that door themselves or opened the discussion is probably not going to go well for you. So if your manager hasn't, said, hey, do you have any input or any feedback on this? I would definitely tread carefully with it, especially if it's something where you think, they have their own skills to work on, just because it could be taken the wrong way with that power dynamic. Hopefully your manager does open up that discussion and does ask for feedback from you. But if they don't, it's definitely something you have to be careful with. Advocating for something that needs to be adjusted, I would go back to the best way to do that is to understand the company strategy and to explain it. Why does it need to be changed in terms of that company strategy? So if you have a strategy to increase or to reduce cost, and there's this process where we're dumping a lot of unseen cost into it, if you go to your boss and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this process, this is how much dollars we're wasting, or even just an estimate, then that's going to be really compelling to them and help them address it. So that would be my suggestion. And I know we're out of time here, but again, thank you. I really appreciate everyone being engaged in the chat on this, and I look forward to talking to some of you later today.